The history of England is the history of the church in one way or another. There has never been a time since the first Christian stepped upon this land where England hasn't been Catholic. Now, okay, you can argue all sorts of different things, but even during the worst of the persecution, there were people there to be persecuted. It wasn't there was nobody left. We have this great tradition in our country of our martyrs, and also of our great families, the recusant families, who kept the faith. 2 weeks ago, I was at saying Mass at Padley. Now, Padley is in Derbyshire. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's where 2 priests were arrested, and the family in the house were arrested. The father spent the rest of his life in the Tower of London. They were a very distinguished old family, and the 2 priests were martyred at Derby, hanged, drawn, and quarters. This was part of the story. The terrors, the persecution of being a Catholic, but there were always Catholics in this country, all the way back. And remember, we talk about the first spring, which is about Augustine, but in fact, it goes back much earlier than that, because the first Christian martyr was a Roman soldier.
And you mentioned in the book something from the 1st century, right?
The 1st century,
signs
yes.
of a...
And
Tertullian in the 3rd century speaks about the Britons.
The British did, so we have to use the word British now, right? Because it wasn't England, Scotland and Wales at the time. It was British in the Roman times, okay? And so there are records of 3 British bishops at the Council of Arles in think about the 3rd century. So there was some form of structures. St. Patrick and the evangelization of Ireland. These were in the early part. So the faith has always been here from those early days. And when we look at our country, even though the suppression of the faith, there was still a Christian church, the Church of England. But where did the Church of England come from? It came from the Catholic Church. It wasn't a new idea. You know, it was a change of a very ancient idea, but it wasn't. But it was there. But there was always Catholic life, although underground, in our land. So when suddenly there is this emancipation, Catholic emancipation, which surprised many people, and there were riots, there was the Gordon riots, there was all sorts of things that took place as a result of Catholic emancipation. Yet the reality was you're emancipating people who had always been here. Therefore, for those who are now, after the emancipation, the official recognition both by the state and the church, something new is happening, and all of us here today are the consequences of the second spring. The parish you belong to, the school you may have gone to, the structures of the church, this building at the back of us here, these are all the fruits of the second spring. Therefore, there was great hope. There was great optimism. We could finally build a school. We could build a seminary. Remember, Oscott started round about 1798 down the road. And this was built in about 1830 something or other. So things are changing, big time. But it began, remember, because of the persecution and the fidelity of the Catholic community in these 4 countries. And that's what we will be celebrating in a couple of years' time.
And bringing that then into the modern day and this idea that we are perhaps living through a 3rd spring. You mentioned at the beginning of your foreword that is there a lovely phrase, a gentle alteration going on. I think alteration is a word that Ignatius Spencer uses in a quote from the beginning.
So I'd just like to read this because this is really significant. So Ignatius, the Venerable Ignatius Spencer, who was a relative of Princess Diana, Spencer family, he was a convert. And he wrote this.
A Passionist too.
A Passionist, yes, yeah. Now that an alteration has taken place in the state of the public feelings towards the Catholic religion, which excites the wonders of its adversaries as well as its friends, Every Catholic must give his heart and hand to the cause. And above all, it surely is now time that with one united cry, we should call upon God to perfect the work which he has begun. If we only contemplate with the eyes of faith the spiritual desolation which still reigns around us, how can we have any thoughts or desire in this world but to do what we can towards this end? That is as relevant today as it was written over 150 years ago.
That phrase alteration in the state of public feelings towards the Catholic religion certainly resonates. So I find if we think in the last few years, just even the gentle change in which the media report on the Catholic Church, I think around Pope Francis' funeral, the election of Pope Leo on the BBC, just immensely positive coverage of the Catholic Church. Felt sort of 5-10 years ago, any article talking about the Catholic Church would have a little dig in there somewhere. But that seems to have gone. There has been this change in public feeling.
There was, if you look at the recent Bible Society report, which subsequently was seen to be flawed, not because of the Bible Society, but because of YouGov didn't get it right and are doing it again. But when it was reported at this remarkable increase in church attendance, particularly in the Catholic Church, and also much smaller, but percentage-wise, in the Pentecostal Church, the reporting was amazing. It truly was remarkable. Every single newspaper reported on it in a positive way. I think the only one that didn't was, I think, the Humanist Weekly or something like that. Pretty predictable. And it was a sense that they were pleased that church attendance was not falling off the cliff. They were pleased by that. The very fact that it was the Catholic Church, there was no antagonism towards it. It was really true. From the New York Times to The Economist, they all reflected on it. So there's a change of wind.
And the public feeling, I think, you can also see in things like public intellectuals, so to speak. 10 years ago, Dawkins and Hitchens were reigning supreme. And now you see figures like Tom Holland, Ayana Hirsi, journeys of conversion of certain kinds having an immense influence on the public.
Enormous. And then, of course, you then have the death of Francis, then the conclave. Now, the conclave was remarkable in itself, right? Because so many people had seen the film, which was good until the rubbish at the end. But it was an accurate description of what happens at a conclave. So you had millions of people who knew what was happening at a conclave, and then suddenly there it is on the telly. And then the most bizarre elements really are when you'd see the continuous newsreel, and at the top left-hand corner, a picture of a chimney. And the poor old commentators
and the seagulls.
Sorry?
And the seagulls.
But was it a seagull?
Oh, wow.
It may be a pigeon.
That's a big question.
One of them is saying, is that a pigeon? And I think it's a seagull, as they're trying to fill in and waiting for the election to happen. And then it happens. And all of a sudden, we have an American Pope. And just again, the reaction was been remarkable at the time. So this was a serious change. I wouldn't compare it to the persecutions of pre-Victorian times, where they said, but something big happened there. Something of great significance has happened here. If we just take the media, and the way the media does shape, what's going on. So they saw something, and it was looked at positively. There was a seed that they could see. And I think that's of great significance in our time, because things definitely are changing. The other day I was talking about, we say there's something in the air. Well, we used to call that the work of the Holy Spirit, because that's what it is. Something in the air is the work of the Holy Spirit. because none of this has come as a result of our plans. God save us from church plans.